Brett was hunched over his desk, red pen poised above a stack of history essays. The clock on the wall ticked past 11 p.m., another Friday night sacrificed to his job. He reached for his coffee mug, grimacing at the cold dregs within. His elbow caught the edge of Marissa's purse, sending its contents scattering across the cluttered surface. "Damn it," he muttered, setting down his pen to gather the fallen items. As he swept his hand under the desk, his fingers brushed against something plastic. He pulled it out, expecting a pen or perhaps one of Marissa's countless hair ties. Instead, he found himself staring at a white stick with two pink lines clearly visible in a small window. Brett's mind went blank for a moment, then kicked into overdrive. A pregnancy test. A positive pregnancy test. He sat back in his chair, the test still clutched in his hand. Memories flooded back, the hopeful starts of IVF treatments, the crushing disappointments, Marissa's tears, and his own tightly controlled grief. 3 times they had tried. 3 times they had failed. The last attempt had nearly broken them, both financially and emotionally. Brett's eyes darted to the purse. Before he could talk himself out of it, he reached in and began rifling through its contents more thoroughly. There, tucked into her wallet behind her driver's license, he found it, an ultrasound image, dated just 2 days prior. His hands shook as he held the grainy black and white photo. A tiny form. Their child. Their miracle. Brett's eyes stung with unshed tears. After everything, it had finally happened. Marissa must have wanted to surprise him. Well, 2 could play at that game. A plan began forming in Brett's mind. He'd wake up early, make Marissa's favorite blueberry pancakes, maybe pick up some flowers from that little shop on the corner. They'd celebrate properly. Make up for lost time. As Brett crawled into bed beside his sleeping wife, he felt lighter than he had in years. Their dream was finally coming true. Saturday morning arrived, pale sunlight filtering through the curtains. Brett eased out of bed, careful not to wake Marissa. He padded downstairs, his mind already on pancake batter and the perfect cup of coffee. As he passed their home office, he heard Marissa's voice, low and urgent. Brett paused. She must have gotten up without him noticing. "I don't know what to do, Jen," Marissa was saying. Brett recognized her sister's name. "I can't keep lying to him." Brett's hand froze on the doorknob. "No, I haven't told Brett yet," Marissa continued. "How can I? You know how desperate he's been for a baby. If he finds out it's Nelson's." The world tilted sideways. Brett stumbled back from the door, mind reeling. Nelson. Nelson Haley. The drama teacher. Charismatic, handsome Nelson with his easy smile and effortless charm. I know, Marissa's voice drifted out. "I have to end things with Nelson. But you should see the way Brett looks at me now. He's so happy, Jen. I can't take that away from him." Brett found himself in the kitchen, not quite sure how he'd gotten there. The ingredients for pancakes sat accusingly on the counter. Mechanically, he began putting them away, his movements wooden and unreal. His wife was pregnant. But not with his child. With Nelson's. And she planned to pass it off as his OWN.AN. Egg slipped from Brett's numb fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. He stared at the yellow yolk spreading across the tile. How fitting. His life lay in pieces at his feet. Monday morning arrived with cruel inevitability. Brett moved through his morning routine in a daze, barely tasting his breakfast, hardly hearing Marissa's cheerful chatter about her plans for the day. The halls of Jefferson High School echoed with the usual cacophony of slamming lockers and adolescent voices. Brett nodded mechanically to passing students and colleagues, all the while scanning the crowd. There, at the end of the hallway, Nelson Haley held court, surrounded by a group of adoring drama students. He gestured animatedly, no doubt regaling them with tales of his latest theatrical triumph. Brett's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He wanted nothing more than to march down that hallway and introduce Nelson's face to the nearest locker door. Repeatedly, but no. He couldn't. Not here. Not now. There was too much at stake. Brett forced himself to turn away, retreating to the relative safety of his classroom. He had a free period first thing. Time enough to think. To plan. The school's ancient desktop computer wheezed to life. Brett's fingers flew across the keyboard, searching for information on paternity laws. Father's rights. But the deeper he dug, the more his stomach churned. Without proof of paternity, he had no legal claim to the child. Marissa could simply name him as the father on the birth certificate. Even if he later proved he wasn't the biological parent, the courts tended to favor the mother in custody disputes. Brett's eyes burned as he stared at the screen. He had always played by the rules. Done the right thing. And where had it gotten him? Betrayed. Facing the loss of a child that wasn't even his. A notification popped up on his screen. A reminder from their joint bank account. Brett clicked it absently, then froze. Large withdrawals, thousands of dollars siphoned off over the past 3 months. Right around the time Marissa must have gotten pregnant. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Money for a secret abortion in case she decided not to keep it. A nest egg to run away with Nelson. Brett's mind raced. He needed more information, more evidence. He couldn't confront Marissa. Not yet. Not until he had an ironclad plan. The bell rang, startling Brett from his thoughts. Students began filing in, chattering and laughing. Brett forced a smile, pushing down the bile rising in his throat. "All right, everyone," he called out, his voice steadier than he felt. "Let's pick up where we left off last class. Who can tell me about the economic factors leading to the Civil War?" As Brett launched into his lecture, a part of his mind continued to churn. He had trusted Marissa implicitly, never questioned her faithfulness. Now, he realized that trust had been his downfall. Well, no more. Brett Hess was done being the naive Boy Scout. It was time to fight fire with fire. Brett stood in the electronics aisle of the local big box store, eyeing the array of security cameras with faint interest. He had done his research, knew exactly which model he needed, but he had to play the part of the concerned new father. "Can I help you find anything, sir?" A chipper sales associate materialized at his elbow. Brett mustered a smile. "Just looking at home security systems. My wife's pregnant, you know. Can't be too careful these days." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. His wife. Pregnant with another man's child. 20 minutes later, Brett left the store with a state-of-the-art security system. Cameras small enough to hide in plain sight, with crystal-clear audio pickup. Perfect for catching adulterous wives in the act. Installing the cameras was almost too easy. Marissa never questioned his sudden interest in home security, she was too preoccupied with her own secrets. The first day yielded nothing of interest. Marissa went about her usual routines, made a few work calls, watched some mindless reality TV. Brett was beginning to think he had overreacted, that maybe he had misheard that damning phone conversation. Then, on day 2, the cameras caught gold. Brett watched the footage with a kind of detached fascination. Marissa curled up on the couch with a glass of wine, phone pressed to her ear. Her best friend Hope's tinny voice emerged from the speakers. "Still can't believe you're pregnant," Hope was saying. "How are you feeling?" Marissa sighed, taking a long sip of wine. "Honestly? Terrified. Guilty. Excited. It's all mixed up." "Have you told Brett yet?" "No," Marissa's voice was small. I can't. You know how much he wants this baby. If he knew it was Nelson's." Brett's hands clenched into fists, nails biting into his palms. He forced himself to keep watching. "You have to tell him, Ray," Hope urged. "The longer you wait, the worse it'll be." I know. It's just, you should see the way he looks at me now. Like I've given him the moon. How can I take that away from him? The conversation devolved into more hand-wringing and rationalizations. Brett tuned it out, his mind already racing ahead to his next move. He had proof now. Incontrovertible evidence of Marissa's infidelity. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Brett's fingers flew across his keyboard, muscle memory taking over as he hacked into Marissa's email account. It wasn't difficult, she still used the same password for everything. Their anniversary date. The irony wasn't lost on him. What he found made his blood run cold: correspondence with an online lender. One with a reputation for being less than scrupulous. Loan applications with blatantly falsified information. This went beyond infidelity. This was fraud. Criminal activity that could land them both in serious trouble. Brett's mind whirred, weighing his options. Part of him wanted to confront Marissa immediately, to demand answers and force a confession. But the more rational part of his brain knew he needed to bide his time. Gather more evidence. Build an airtight case. With trembling hands, Brett composed an anonymous tip to the bank and local authorities detailing the financial irregularities he had uncovered. It felt like a betrayal. But he reminded himself, Marissa had betrayed him first. He was just protecting himself now. The next day at school, a staff meeting was called. The principal's face was grim as she addressed the assembled faculty. As some of you may have heard, the state has announced significant budget cuts for the coming year, she began. I'm afraid this means we'll be facing some difficult decisions in the coming months. Layoffs may be necessary. A ripple of unease spread through the room. Brett's eyes darted to Nelson, noting the sudden pallor of the other man's face. Good. Let him sweat a little. As the meeting dispersed, Brett found himself cornered by Nelson. The drama teacher's usual easy charm seemed forced, his smile a touch too wide. Hey, Brett, I hear congratulations are in order, Nelson said, clapping him on the shoulder. Marissa must be over the moon. It took every ounce of Brett's self-control not to deck the man right there in the hallway. Instead, he forced a smile. Thanks, Nelson. We're both thrilled. Nelson's eyes flickered, a hint of guilt crossing his features. Listen, I was thinking, the drama club could really use a faculty advisor. Someone to help out with the administrative side of things. You interested? Brett's mind whirred. This could be an opportunity. A chance to get closer. To gather more information. You know what? That sounds great. I'd be happy to help out. As Nelson chatted excitedly about upcoming productions, Brett nodded along, all the while imagining 1,000 painful ways to make the man suffer. The trap was set. Now all Brett had to do was wait for his prey to stumble into it. The dining room was bathed in soft candlelight, the table set with their best china. Brett had outdone himself, a 3-course meal, Marissa's favorites. The perfect setting for a celebration. Marissa picked at her food, tension radiating from every line of her body. Brett watched her. Waiting. He had given her plenty of opportunities to come clean over the past week. Now, it seemed she had finally worked up the courage. Brett, she began, setting down her fork. I have something to tell you. He arranged his features into a mask of concern. What is it, sweetheart? Is everything okay? Marissa took a deep breath. I'm pregnant. Brett let his fork clatter to the plate, quickly rearranging his expression into one of joyful shock. Are you serious? He stood, pulling Marissa into an embrace. Over her shoulder, his eyes were cold and calculating. Oh my God, this is amazing! Brett exclaimed, his voice thick with false emotion. When did you find out? How far along are you? He watched carefully as Marissa stumbled through her responses, noting every nervous glance, every hesitation. She was a terrible liar. Really, how had he never noticed before? I can't believe it, Brett murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. After everything we've been through, it's finally happening. Marissa's smile was watery, guilt clouding her eyes. I know, it's a miracle. A miracle. Brett wanted to laugh. Or maybe scream. Instead, he held his wife close, his mind already racing ahead to the next phase of his plan. So, he said, pulling back to look at her. When did this miracle happen exactly? I mean, we haven't exactly been trying lately, with all the stress from the failed IVF attempts. Marissa's eyes darted away. Oh, you know, it must have been that night after Sarah's wedding. Remember? We both had a bit too much champagne, Brett remembered. He also remembered that Sarah's wedding had been nearly 4 months ago. If Marissa was only now announcing her pregnancy, the timing didn't quite add up. But he simply smiled, nodding along. Of course. How could I forget? It was a magical night. Marissa relaxed slightly, clearly relieved that he wasn't pushing the issue. It really was, and now we have this to look forward to. Brett raised his wine glass. To our little miracle, he toasted, watching as Marissa took a sip of her water. The web of lies was growing more tangled by the day. Soon, very soon, Brett would be ready to tear it all down. The next day at school, Brett threw himself into his new role as drama club advisor with gusto. He sat in on rehearsals, offering suggestions and praise in equal measure. He helped with costumes and set design, always making sure to defer to Nelson's expertise. That it was sickening, really, how easily Nelson fell for the act. The man preened under Brett's attention, clearly thrilled to have another admirer in his orbit. You know, Brett, Nelson said one afternoon as they were striking the set after rehearsal. I have to admit, I had my doubts when you first volunteered. Didn't really peg you as a theatrical type. But you've been a godsend. Brett smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. Happy to help. It's been enlightening. Enlightening indeed. That I and the weeks since he joined the drama club, Brett had gathered a wealth of information. He had overheard hushed phone conversations between Nelson and Marissa, watched as they exchanged meaningful glances across crowded hallways. But it wasn't enough. He needed something concrete. Something that would force the school board's hand. The opportunity presented itself in the form of Amber Cahan, a junior with stars in her eyes and a crush on Nelson a mile wide. Brett watched as Nelson lavished attention on the girl, offering private coaching sessions, gushing praise for her mediocre performances. It was all very above board, of course. Nelson was too smart to actually cross that line, but perception was everything. That it took some doing, but Brett eventually managed to convince Amber's mother to file a complaint. Nothing too salacious, just concerns about the amount of time her daughter was spending alone with Mr. Haley, the way he seemed to favor her over other students. The complaint landed on the principal's desk on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, the school board had launched a full investigation into Nelson's conduct. Brett watched from the sidelines as Nelson's carefully constructed world began to crumble. The man was a nervous wreck, jumping at shadows and snapping at students. Good, Brett thought. Let him suffer. Let him feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused. The pieces were falling into place. Soon, very soon, Brett would have everything he needed to bring Marissa's carefully constructed house of lies crashing down around her. Are you sure about this? Marissa asked, worry creasing her brow. A whole month in D.C. What about your classes? Brett zipped up his suitcase, forcing a reassuring smile. It's a great opportunity, honey. The school's already arranged for a long-term sub. And think how good it'll look for my tenure review. Marissa nodded, but the concern didn't leave her eyes. I'll miss you. For a moment, Brett almost faltered. Almost believed the sincerity in her voice. But then he remembered. The overheard phone calls. The secret smiles exchanged with Nelson in the school hallways. I'll miss you too, he lied smoothly. But it'll fly by, you'll see. And when I get back, we can start really preparing for the baby. Marissa's hand flew to her stomach, guilt flashing across her face. Right. The baby. Brett kissed her cheek, grabbed his bags, and headed out the door, but instead of driving to the airport, he made his way across town to a nondescript apartment complex. The place was small, sparsely furnished, but it would do for the next month. This would be his base of operations. Brett set up his laptop, connecting to the feed from the hidden cameras in his house. Then, he settled in to watch and wait. It didn't take long for Marissa to take advantage of his absence. The very next day, Nelson's car pulled into their driveway just after sunset. Brett watched, bile rising in his throat, as Marissa welcomed her lover into their home. Into their bed. Over the next few weeks, Brett meticulously documented every encounter, every hushed phone call, every secret rendezvous. He compiled financial records, tracked suspicious transactions, built a case so airtight it would make a seasoned prosecutor weep with joy. And then, when he was sure he had everything he needed, Brett made his final move. It was child's play to track down Nelson's wife. Faith Haley was a well-respected pediatrician, her office just a few miles from the high school. Brett felt a twinge of guilt as he prepared the envelope. She was an innocent in all this, after all. But he squashed the feeling ruthlessly. Collateral damage was unavoidable in war. The package he sent contained irrefutable evidence of Nelson's affair, photos, video stills, transcripts of damning conversations. He included a brief anonymous note expressing sympathy and suggesting she seek legal counsel. Then, Brett sat back and waited for the dominoes to fall. He didn't have to wait long. The next day, his burner phone lit up with a text from the neighbor he'd enlisted to keep an eye on the house. Police just left. Your wife looked upset. Brett allowed himself a smile. Phase 1 complete. A few hours later, another text came through, this one from the fake email account he'd set up to communicate with the bank's fraud department. Accounts frozen pending investigation. Further action may be necessary. Perfect. The noose was tightening. Brett gave it another day before making his next move. He called Marissa, making sure to sound appropriately concerned. Honey, is everything okay? Mrs. Abney next door said she saw police at the house yesterday. Marissa's voice was strained, on the edge of panic. Brett, I need you to come home. Something's happened. I can't explain over the phone. Brett feigned confusion and worry. What? Marissa, you're scaring me. What's going on? Please, she begged. Just come home. I'll explain everything, I promise. Brett hung up, a sense of satisfaction settling over him. The endgame was approaching. Soon, very soon, he would have his revenge. As he packed up his temporary living space, Brett allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought of the life he had planned with Marissa, the family they were supposed to have. All of it, gone in an instant. But from the ashes of that dream, a new Brett had risen, harder, colder, smarter. Marissa and Nelson had no idea what was coming for them. But they were about to find out. Brett's key turned in the lock, the familiar sound now carrying a weight of finality. He stepped into the house he'd once called home, bracing himself for the performance of a lifetime. Marissa sat at the kitchen table, her face pale and drawn. Red-rimmed eyes darted up to meet his, a mixture of relief and fear evident in her gaze. Brett, she breathed, rushing to embrace him. Oh God, I'm so glad you're home. He allowed himself to be enfolded in her arms, noting the slight swell of her stomach pressing against him. The child that should have been his miracle, now just another lie. What's going on, Marissa? Brett asked, injecting just the right amount of concern into his voice. I got your message. Are you okay? Is it the baby? Marissa pulled back, wringing her hands. No, the baby's fine. It's everything else. Brett, we're in trouble. Big trouble. She launched into a tearful explanation of frozen bank accounts and police inquiries. Brett listened, nodding at all the right moments, his face a mask of growing concern. "I don't understand," he said when she finished. "How could this happen? Where did all that money go?" Marissa's eyes dropped to the floor. I made some bad decisions. Took out some loans. I thought I could pay them back before you noticed, but just, Marissa." Brett ran a hand through his hair, the picture of a man struggling to process shocking news. "How much are we talking about here?" When she told him the figure, Brett let out a low whistle. "Christ. That's everything we have. More than everything." Marissa nodded miserably. "I know. I'm so sorry, Brett. I never meant for this to happen." Brett paced the kitchen, mind worrying. He had anticipated this moment for weeks, planned out every word, every reaction. Now, it was time to spring the trap. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, we need to think this through logically. What are our options?" Marissa looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. You're not leaving me." Brett knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Of course not. We're in this together, remember? For better or worse." The irony of those words wasn't lost on him. But Marissa nodded, squeezing his hands gratefully. "So," Brett continued, "we need to figure out how to pay back these loans before things get any worse. Have you talked to a lawyer?" Marissa shook her head. "I was too scared. I didn't know what to do." Brett nodded as if considering their options. Then, with careful hesitation, he spoke. What about the house?" Marissa's head snapped up. "The house? What do you mean?" "Well," Brett said slowly, "it's our biggest asset. If we sold it, we could pay off the loans. Maybe have enough left over to start fresh somewhere else." "Sell the house?" Marissa's voice was small, disbelieving. "But where would we go?" Brett shrugged, the picture of a man grasping at straws. "We could rent for a while, save up. Maybe move closer to your parents. They'd love to have us nearby with the baby coming." He watched as Marissa processed the idea, saw the moment when desperation overcame her reservations. "You really think we could do that?" she asked. "Just start over." Brett nodded, squeezing her hand. "I think we have to. It's our only option." Marissa was quiet for a long moment. Then, with a shaky sigh, she nodded. Okay. Let's do it." Brett pulled her into a hug, allowing himself a small, triumphant smile over her shoulder. She had no idea that he had already set the wheels in motion, that a buyer was already lined up thanks to his realtor friend, Jim. As he held his wife, Brett's mind raced ahead to the next phase of his plan. The house was just the beginning. Soon, Marissa would lose everything, just as he had. Across town, in a tastefully decorated office, another scene was unfolding. Faith Haley, respected pediatrician and wife of Nelson Haley, sat across from her lawyer, a manila envelope clutched in her whitened knuckles. "Are you sure about this, Faith?" the lawyer asked gently. "Once we file, there's no going back." Faith nodded, her jaw set in determination. "I'm sure. I want him out of my life. Out of my children's lives," the lawyer nodded, pulling out the necessary forms. "All right then, let's begin the process of filing for divorce. We'll cite adultery as the grounds, naming Marissa Hess as the other woman." As Faith began filling out the paperwork, her hand shook slightly, but her resolve never wavered. Nelson had made his choice. Now, he would face the consequences. Back at Jefferson High School, those consequences were already becoming apparent. Nelson sat in the principal's office, his usual charm nowhere in sight as he faced the stern members of the school board. "Mr. Haley," the superintendent began, "I hope you understand the seriousness of these allegations." Nelson nodded, sweat beading on his forehead. "Of course, but I assure you, it's all a misunderstanding. I would never," Save it, the principal cut him off. We received multiple complaints about your conduct, Mr. Haley. Inappropriate behavior with students. Misuse of school resources. The list goes on. Nelson's face paled. But that's not true. I've always been professional. We have no choice but to suspend you pending a full investigation, the superintendent continued, as if Nelson hadn't spoken. Please turn in your keys and school ID. You are not to set foot on campus or contact any students until this matter is resolved. Do you understand? Nelson nodded numbly, his world crumbling around him. As he stumbled out of the office, he pulled out his phone, desperately scrolling to Marissa's number. The call went straight to voicemail. Nelson was alone. The for sale sign stood stark against the manicured lawn, a tangible symbol of destroyed dreams. Brett watched from the window as a young couple toured the property, Jim the realtor gesturing enthusiastically. They seem nice, Marissa said softly, coming to stand beside him. Do you think they'll make an offer? Brett nodded, allowing a small smile. Jim thinks so. He said they fell in love with the place as soon as they saw it. Marissa's hand drifted to her growing belly, a gesture that no longer inspired joy in Brett, only a dull ache of betrayal. It's a good home, she murmured. I hope they'll be happy here. Brett turned to face her, steeling himself for what came next. Marissa, we need to talk. She looked up, brow furrowing at his serious tone. What is it? Did something else happen with the bank? No, nothing like that. Brett took a deep breath. I know, Marissa. About everything. Marissa's face went pale. What do you mean? In response, Brett pulled out his phone, queuing up one of the damning videos he had captured. Marissa's voice filled the room, discussing her affair with Nelson in excruciating detail. She stumbled back, horror dawning on her face. Brett, I can explain. Don't. Brett's voice was ice. Don't insult me with more lies. He pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase, sliding it across the kitchen table. Divorce papers. I'm citing adultery and financial fraud. Marissa's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Brett, please, she begged. We can work this out. I'll end things with Nelson, I swear. We can raise this baby together. Be a family. That's not my child, Brett cut her off. And you're not the woman I married. The woman I loved. Tears streamed down Marissa's face. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never meant to hurt you. Please, Brett, give me another chance. I'll do anything. For a moment, Brett almost wavered. The pain in Marissa's eyes was real, her remorse seemingly genuine, but then he remembered. The overheard phone calls. The secret smiles exchanged with Nelson. The utter betrayal of everything they had built together. It's too late, Brett said quietly. I've already sold the house. Marissa's head snapped up. What? But we just put it on the market. How could you? Jim's been working on it for weeks, Brett explained. The couple outside, they're here to sign the final paperwork. Weeks? Marissa's voice was faint. You've been planning this for weeks? Brett nodded. Ever since I found out about your affair. About the baby. Marissa sank into a chair, her world crumbling around her. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. Brett's voice was devoid of emotion. I suggest you call Nelson. I'm sure he'd be happy to take you in. Oh wait, he added with a cruel smile. He can't. He's been suspended pending an investigation into his conduct at school. Seems someone filed a complaint about inappropriate behavior with students. Marissa's eyes widened in realization. You did this? All of it? Brett shrugged. You made your choices, Marissa. Now you get to live with the consequences. He picked up a suitcase, already packed and waiting by the door. I'm leaving for California next month. I've accepted a position at a private school in San Francisco, California. Marissa echoed, her voice hollow. You're moving across the country. Fresh start, Brett said simply. Something we both need, I think. He paused at the door, looking back at the woman he had once loved more than life itself. Goodbye, Marissa. I hope it was worth it. With that, Brett walked out, leaving Marissa alone in the empty shell of their former life. The courtroom was packed, a mix of curious onlookers and grim-faced lawyers. Marissa sat at the defendant's table, her once stylish clothes now ill-fitting on her 7 months pregnant frame. The judge's gavel came down with a resounding crack. Marissa Hess, you've been found guilty of loan fraud. Given the extent of your deception and the amount of money involved, this court sentences you to 3 years in federal prison, to be served after the birth of your child. Additionally, your teaching license is hereby suspended pending further review. Marissa's shoulders slumped, the full weight of her actions finally crashing down upon her. As the bailiff led her away, she caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Nelson stood at the back of the courtroom, his appearance a far cry from the dashing drama teacher he had once been. Unshaven, clothes rumpled, he looked like a man who had lost everything. Which, Marissa realized with a sinking heart, he had. Just like her, Nelson approached as Marissa was allowed a moment with her lawyer. Marissa, he began, reaching for her hand. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Marissa jerked away from his touch. Don't, she hissed. Haven't you done enough? Nelson's face fell. I thought maybe we could start over. When you get out, we could what, Nelson? Marissa cut him off. Be together. Play happy families. It's over. All of it. As the bailiff returned to escort her out, Marissa turned back to Nelson one last time. Goodbye, Nelson. I hope she was worth it. Nelson watched her go, the weight of his choices settling heavily on his shoulders. He had lost his job, his wife, his children, and now, he had lost Marissa too. That he stumbled out of the courtroom, unsure where to go or what to do next. His life, once so full of promise, had become a cautionary tale. Miles away, in a sun-drenched classroom in San Francisco, Brett Hess stood before a group of eager students. All right, everyone, he began, a genuine smile on his face. Let's talk about the Civil War. Who can tell me about the economic factors that led to this pivotal moment in American history? As hands shot up around the room, Brett felt a sense of peace settle over him. The betrayal, the pain, the elaborate revenge, it all seemed like a distant memory now. After class, Brett made his way to a small office in the school's administration wing. A plaque on the door read Guidance Counselor. Inside, a teenager sat nervously in one of the chairs. Brett smiled warmly as he took his seat. So, Tyler, he began, I understand you're interested in our school's mentorship program. As the boy nodded eagerly, Brett felt a familiar surge of purpose. This was why he had become a teacher in the first place, to make a difference, to help shape young lives. Later that evening, Brett sat at his desk, penning a letter to the local fertility clinic. He had been making anonymous donations for months now, funding IVF treatments for couples struggling to conceive. It was his way of turning pain into purpose, of ensuring that some good came from the ashes of his own shattered dreams. As he sealed the envelope, Brett's phone buzzed with a notification, a reminder for his volunteer shift at the adoption agency tomorrow. Brett smiled, a sense of contentment washing over him. He had survived the storm, emerged stronger on the other side. And now, finally, he was exactly where he was meant to be. Story 2. Alfred Frell stood at the kitchen sink, his weathered 40-year-old hands methodically washing dishes. 15 years as a postal worker had given him an appreciation for routine, but lately, something felt off. His wife, Hope, had developed a sudden obsession with her appearance, and he had noticed, new clothes, a different hairstyle, hours spent preening in front of the mirror. At first, Alfred had been flattered, thinking she was making an effort for him, but as the weeks passed, a gnawing suspicion took root in his gut. The sound of Hope's muffled giggles drifted from the living room, grating on his nerves like sandpaper. He dried his hands and padded quietly toward the source of the sound. Hope was sprawled on the couch, phone pressed to her ear, a secret smile playing on her lips. As he entered, she startled, sitting up abruptly. "Oh, I've got to go," she said hurriedly into the phone. "Talk to you later, Beth." Alfred raised an eyebrow. "Beth? From your book club?" Hope nodded a touch too enthusiastically. "Yes. We were just discussing our latest read. You know how we get carried away." He did know. He also knew that Hope's book club met on Tuesdays, and today was clearly Thursday. But he said nothing, merely grunting an acknowledgement before retreating to the laundry room. As he sorted through the clothes, his hand brushed against Hope's purse. A slip of paper fell out, a receipt. Alfred's eyes widened as he read the itemized list. $300 for a scrap of lace he had never seen. The gnawing in his gut intensified. That night, after Hope had fallen asleep, Alfred lay awake, his mind racing. He thought about the 15 years they had been married, the routines they had settled into, the comfortable silences that had once felt like home but now stretched between them like a chasm. He made a decision. The next day, while Hope was at work, Alfred installed a discreet GPS tracker on her car. It was a simple device, easily hidden beneath the passenger seat. As he activated it, a wave of guilt washed over him. This wasn't who he was. He had been a Boy Scout, for Christ's sake, trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Over the next week, Alfred watched as the little blinking dot representing Hope's car made frequent trips to the Sunset Motel across town. Each time, his heart sank a little lower. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He called in sick to work, something he hadn't done in years. His supervisor, Dave, sounded concerned. "You all right, Frel? You never take time off." "Just a bug," Alfred lied smoothly. "I'll be back tomorrow, good as new." As soon as Hope left for work, Alfred followed at a discreet distance. His palms were sweaty on the steering wheel as he watched her pull into the Sunset Motel parking lot. He parked across the street, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. And then he saw him, Justin Hendrick, the popular local radio DJ and Hope's co-worker. Alfred had met him once at a company picnic, charming, funny, with a voice like melted chocolate. Everything Alfred wasn't that he watched, feeling like he was having an out-of-body experience, as Hope practically ran into Justin's arms. Their lips met in an embrace that made Alfred's stomach turn. With shaking hands, he raised his phone and snapped a few photos. Evidence. That's what he needed now. As he lowered the phone, his eyes met Justin's across the parking lot. For a split second, recognition flashed in the other man's eyes. Then Hope pulled him into the motel room, and the door slammed shut. Alfred sat in his car for a long time after that, staring at nothing. He felt hollow, gutted. But beneath the pain, something else was stirring, a cold, calculating anger that surprised him with its intensity. His mind was already formulating a plan. Over the next few weeks, Alfred maintained a convincing facade of normalcy at home. He smiled at Hope over breakfast, asked about her day, and even surprised her with flowers one evening. All the while, he was meticulously gathering evidence. His first stop was the Sunset Motel. The owner, Sam, was a chatty man in his 60s who seemed flattered by Alfred's attention. Alfred spun a tale about writing a novel on small-town life, and Sam was more than happy to regale him with stories about the motel's colorful history. "You must see all sorts here," Alfred said casually one afternoon, leaning against the front desk. Sam chuckled. "Oh, you wouldn't believe the half of it. Affairs, mostly. People thinking they're being so clever. But it's always the same story. Alfred's hand tightened on the edge of the desk. I bet you have some security measures in place, though, for insurance purposes, if nothing else. Sam nodded toward a camera in the corner of the lobby. Just the one there. Records everything that happens in this lobby. Alfred's eyes gleamed. Fascinating. Mind if I take a look at how it's set up? You know, for the book. Sam hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. Why not? Come on back. In the small office behind the front desk, Sam showed Alfred the ancient computer that served as the motel's security system. It didn't take much for Alfred to convince Sam to let him study it for his novel. Once alone, Alfred's fingers flew over the keyboard. He may have been a postal worker, but he had picked up some IT skills during his stint in the military. Within minutes, he had access to months of security footage. He found what he was looking for almost immediately: Hope and Justin entering and leaving the motel at regular intervals. Sometimes they looked furtive, glancing around nervously. Other times, they were so wrapped up in each other they might as well have been alone in the world. Alfred copied the relevant footage onto a flash drive, his face impassive. When Sam returned, Alfred was leaning back in the chair, a pleasant smile on his face. Find what you needed? Sam asked. Alfred nodded. Oh yes, very enlightening. Thank you, Sam. Back at home, Alfred turned his attention to Hope's email. She had always been careless with her passwords, using the same one for everything, their anniversary date. The irony wasn't lost on Alfred as he easily gained access to her account. What he found made his blood run cold. Months of intimate exchanges between Hope and Justin. Plans for their rendezvous. Declarations of passion. And worst of all, lies about working overtime at the radio station to meet Justin. Alfred read every single email, saving copies to an external hard drive. By the time he was done, it was well past midnight that he heard Hope stirring upstairs and quickly shut down the computer. As he climbed into bed beside her, Hope mumbled sleepily. Everything okay? You were up late. Alfred forced a smile. Just catching up on some work. Go back to sleep, honey. Hope snuggled closer to him, and Alfred lay rigid, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the vows they had made, the life they had built together, all of it based on a foundation of lies. In that moment, something inside Alfred hardened. The pain was still there, a dull ache in his chest, but it was overshadowed by a cold, calculating anger. He reached for the bedside table, pulling out a small notebook. In the dim light of the alarm clock, he began to write, every detail of Hope's betrayal, every piece of evidence he had gathered. It would become his journal, a record of his emotional journey. And though he didn't know it yet, it would become crucial to his plan. The next morning, Alfred called his supervisor at the post office. Dave, it's Alfred. I need to take a week off. Family emergency, out of state. Dave sounded concerned. Everything all right, Frel? This isn't like you. Alfred forced a note of worry into his voice. My sister is in the hospital. Nothing too serious, but I need to be there. You understand, right? Of course, of course. Take all the time you need. With that taken care of, Alfred set his plan in motion. His first stop was a small, cash-only apartment across town. The landlord didn't ask questions when Alfred handed over 3 months' rent in cash, using the name Nick Buford. Next, he visited a graphic designer in the next town over. The young woman looked skeptical when Alfred explained what he wanted, a life-size promotional poster for a surprise anniversary party. Alfred nodded, his face a mask of enthusiasm. My wife's always wanted to be a movie star. I thought it would be fun to make her the star of her own movie poster. He handed over the photos he had taken of Hope and Justin outside the motel. The designer's eyebrows rose, but she took the job, agreeing to create a life-size design. Back in town, Alfred made a stop at the home of Marissa, a mutual friend of his and Hope's. She was delighted to see him. Alfred. What a nice surprise. Come in. Over coffee, Alfred spun a tale about planning surprise parties for both Hope and Justin. I was hoping you might have spare keys to their houses, he said casually. You know, for decorating and such. Marissa hesitated for a moment, then smiled. Oh, why not? It's for a good cause, after all. As he left Marissa's house, keys to both Hope and Justin's homes in hand, Alfred felt a twinge of guilt. He had never been a good liar before, but he was learning fast. That evening, as Hope chatted about her day over dinner, Alfred nodded and smiled in all the right places. But his mind was elsewhere, running through the logistics of his plan. That morning, he had learned that budget cuts were coming at work, his job might be on the line. It added a sense of urgency to his actions. After dinner, while Hope was engrossed in her favorite TV show, Alfred slipped down to the basement. He powered up his computer and began researching divorce laws, property division, alimony, grounds for divorce. He took meticulous notes, then he turned his attention to his personal assets, investments, savings accounts, their joint checking account. He began the process of liquidating what he could, moving money around in a complex shell game. As he worked, Alfred felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. For the first time in weeks, he felt in control. Hope might have betrayed him, but he would have the last laugh. He glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight. He could hear Hope moving around upstairs, probably wondering where he was. For a moment, he considered going up, playing the role of devoted husband one more time. Instead, he turned back to his computer. He had work to do, preparing for all contingencies. The night air was thick with anticipation as Alfred Frell crouched in the shadows outside the WKRP radio station. His heart hammered against his ribs, a steady rhythm that matched the ticking of his watch. 11:45 p.m. 15 minutes until the cleaning crew's shift change. 15 minutes until he set his plan in motion. He adjusted the backpack slung over his shoulder, feeling the weight of the rolled-up poster inside. The life-size image of Hope and Justin, caught in a passionate embrace outside the Sunset Motel, felt like a bomb waiting to detonate. And Alfred was about to light the fuse. As the last of the cleaning staff trickled out of the building, Alfred made his move. He slipped inside, his footsteps echoing in the empty lobby. The security guard was doing his rounds on the upper floors. Alfred had memorized the schedule over the past week. He had exactly 7 minutes before the guard returned. With practiced efficiency, he unrolled the poster and began hanging it in the center of the main lobby. His hands shook slightly as he smoothed out the creases, revealing the damning image inch by inch, Hope's face frozen in ecstasy, Justin's hands possessive and hungry. It was obscene. It was perfect. Stepping back, Alfred surveyed his handiwork. The poster dominated the space, impossible to miss. But something was missing. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a can of red spray paint. In bold, dripping letters, he wrote beneath the image, "We know what you did." The words seemed to pulse in the dim light, accusing and final. Alfred allowed himself a grim smile. Let them try to explain this away. With 2 minutes to spare, he retreated to a hidden alcove and pulled out his laptop. His fingers flew over the keys as he hacked into the station's email server. One by one, messages pinged out to every employee, from the lowest intern to the station manager himself. The subject line read, "New art installation in the lobby, don't miss it." As he heard the elevator ding, signaling the guard's return, Alfred slipped out through a side exit. The cool night air hit his face, and he took a deep breath. Phase 1, complete. He drove to the hotel he had booked near his fictional sister's house, securing his alibi. As he checked in, he made a show of looking haggard and worried, playing the part of the concerned brother to perfection. "Room service, please," he told the sympathetic desk clerk. "I've been on the road all day visiting my sick sister. I'm exhausted." Once in his room, Alfred set up his laptop and connected to the station's security cameras. He had planted a backdoor in their system weeks ago, and now it gave him a front-row seat to the chaos about to unfold. He settled back against the headboard, a glass of whiskey in hand. On the screen, the night guard was making his final rounds. Any minute now, he would turn the corner and come face to face with Alfred's handiwork. Alfred raised his glass in a silent toast. "Showtime," he murmured. Hope hummed to herself as she applied her lipstick, blissfully unaware of the storm about to break over her head. She had woken up to an empty bed. Alfred had left early for work, or so she thought. Her phone buzzed with a text from Justin. "Can't wait to see you at the charity event tonight. You're going to knock them dead in that new dress." Hope smiled, a mixture of excitement and guilt twisting in her stomach. She pushed the guilt aside, as she had been doing for months now. Alfred would never know. He was too trusting, too caught up in his own routine to notice what was happening right under his nose. As she left the house, Hope never noticed the figure watching from across the street. Alfred waited until her car had turned the corner before making his move. He entered the house, their house, with the spare key he had never returned. For a moment, he stood in the entryway, memories washing over him. Their first night here, carrying Hope over the threshold. Christmases. Birthdays. Lazy Sunday mornings. All tainted now. Alfred shook off the nostalgia and got to work. He moved through the rooms like a whirlwind, methodically creating chaos. He overturned drawers, scattered papers, smashed picture frames. But it wasn't random destruction. Every move was calculated. He focused on Hope's belongings and their shared spaces, leaving his own things largely untouched. A message hidden in the mayhem: this was about her, not him. As he worked, Alfred planted tiny cameras throughout the house. In the bedroom. The kitchen. The living room. Each one carefully hidden, ready to capture Hope's reaction when she returned home. In the study, Alfred paused. He pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. The words flowed easily, all the pain and betrayal of the past months pouring onto the page. When he was done, he read it over. "Hope, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I know about Justin. I know about the Sunset Motel. I know about the lies, the deceit, the betrayal. Every moment. Every touch. Every whispered promise. I know it all. Did you think I was too stupid to notice? Too blind to see what was happening right in front of me? I may be just a simple postal worker, but I'm not a fool. I've taken what's mine. Don't bother looking for me. Don't bother trying to explain, there's nothing left to say. Goodbye, Hope. I hope it was worth it." Alfred he folded the letter and placed it on Hope's pillow, a landmine waiting to be triggered. Before leaving, Alfred gathered up the important documents he would need: birth certificate, social security card, bank statements. He also took a few sentimental items: his grandfather's watch, the baseball signed by his childhood hero, the photo album from their honeymoon. Let Hope wonder why these specific things were missing. As a final touch, Alfred picked up the phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, he disguised his voice, pitching it higher and adding a tremor of fear. "Please, you have to help. I just saw someone breaking into the house across the street, 1242, Maple Drive. They're still inside." He hung up before the operator could ask any questions. The police would arrive soon, adding another layer of chaos to Hope's homecoming. Alfred took one last look around the house that had been his home for 15 years, then walked out the door, leaving behind the wreckage of his old life. Alfred sat in the sterile environment of his local bank, his face a mask of calm as he systematically dismantled his financial life. The teller, a young woman with concerned eyes, watched as he closed account after account. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Frell?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "That's a significant amount of money to transfer offshore." Alfred nodded, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Quite sure. Thank you. I'm making some lifestyle changes." As the last of his and Hope's joint accounts was drained, Alfred felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had spent weeks researching offshore banking, setting up a labyrinth of transfers that would be nearly impossible to trace. Hope wouldn't see a penny of it. Next stop, the credit card companies. One by one, Alfred cancelled every card they shared. He could almost hear the distant sound of Hope's wallet becoming worthless. Sitting in his car outside the bank, Alfred pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen for a long moment before composing an email to his boss at the post office. Dear Dave, I regret to inform you that I must resign from my position effective immediately. Personal circumstances have arisen that require my full attention. I apologize for the short notice and any inconvenience this may cause. Thank you for your understanding. Sincerely, Alfred Frell. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. 15 years of service ended with a few taps on a screen, but it was necessary. He couldn't risk anyone at work connecting him to what was about to unfold at the radio station. Alfred's next task was perhaps the cruelest, but he felt no remorse as he sealed the envelope. Inside was a comprehensive dossier of Hope and Justin's affair, hotel receipts, email printouts, photos from the motel. On the front, in clear block letters, he had written, Mrs. Faith Hendricks. He dropped the package in a mailbox across town, imagining the bomb it would detonate in Justin's home. Let him feel the sting of betrayal. 2. The sun began to set. Alfred drove to the long-term parking lot at the airport. He pulled into a spot near the back, away from the security cameras. From his trunk, he retrieved a suitcase he had packed for this very purpose. He placed it on the passenger seat, making sure it was clearly visible. On top, he left a printed itinerary for a one-way flight to Bangkok, departing in 2 days. Let them chase shadows halfway around the world. His final stop was a small apartment he had rented under the name Nick Buford. It was sparsely furnished, but it had everything he needed, a bed, a desk, and most importantly, a top-of-the-line computer setup. Alfred settled into the chair, powering up the multiple monitors. On one screen, he pulled up the feed from the hidden cameras in his and Hope's house. Another showed the security footage from the radio station. A third displayed local news sites, ready to catch any breaking stories. He leaned back, a tumbler of whiskey in hand. The pieces were all in place. Now, he just had to watch it all burn. As night fell, Alfred Frell disappeared. And Nick Buford, a man with no past and an uncertain future, began his vigil. Hope Frell's heels clicked against the polished floor of the WKRP radio station lobby, the sound echoing in the early morning quiet. She was running late for the charity event planning meeting, her mind still fuzzy from a night of stolen moments with Justin. As she rounded the corner, her steps faltered, then stopped completely. There, dominating the lobby wall, was a life-sized poster of her and Justin, locked in an embrace outside the Sunset Motel. Hope's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Beneath the damning image, blood-red letters screamed, "We know what you did." "Oh my God," she whispered, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her mouth. Around her, the lobby began to fill with arriving employees. Gasps and whispers erupted as each person caught sight of the poster. Hope stood frozen, feeling dozens of eyes boring into her. "Hope, what's going on? Why is everyone?" Justin's voice cut off abruptly as he entered the lobby. His face, usually so confident and charming, drained of all color. Their eyes met across the room, panic and shame mirrored in each other's gaze. In that moment, Hope knew, their carefully constructed house of lies was crumbling around them. "Frell. Hendricks. My office. Now." The station manager's voice boomed through the lobby, cutting through the growing murmurs. Hope and Justin followed him in silence, feeling like condemned prisoners walking to the gallows. As the office door closed behind them, shutting out the chaos of the lobby, Hope felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. "Would either of you care to explain what the hell is going on out there?" The manager's face was purple with rage, a vein throbbing in his forehead. Hope opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? Justin, ever the smooth talker, tried to salvage the situation. Sir, I can assure you, this is all just a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? The manager slammed his fist on the desk. There's a billboard-sized photo of you two going at it like rabbits in my lobby. Do you have any idea what this could do to the station? To our reputation? Hope sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. You're both suspended effective immediately, pending a full investigation, the manager continued. Now get out of my sight before I do something I regret. As they left the office, Hope's phone buzzed with a text from Alfred. Hope, something's happened at the house. You need to come home now. Her heart, already racing, kicked into overdrive. What else could possibly go wrong? She sped home, her mind a whirlwind of panic and confusion. As she pulled into the driveway, she saw police cars parked outside. Her hands shook as she fumbled with her keys. The moment she stepped inside, Hope's world tilted on its axis. The house was in shambles, drawers upended, pictures smashed. It looked like a tornado had torn through their once peaceful home. Mrs. Frell, a police officer, approached her. We received a call about a break-in at this address. Can you tell us if anything's missing? Hope stumbled through the house in a daze, barely registering the officer's words. When she reached the bedroom, she saw it, a letter, placed neatly on her pillow amidst the chaos. With trembling hands, she unfolded the paper and began to read. Alfred's words, cold and cutting, laid bare every secret, every lie. He knew. He had always known. Hope's legs gave out, and she collapsed to the floor, the letter clutched to her chest as the reality of what she had lost crashed over her. She began to sob, great, heaving cries that shook her entire body. The police officers exchanged uncomfortable glances, their suspicions growing with each passing moment. Across town, Faith Hendricks stared at the package that had just arrived, its contents spread across her kitchen table, photos, emails, hotel receipts. Irrefutable evidence of her husband's infidelity. With a calm she didn't feel, Faith walked to the front door and changed the locks. Then she called her lawyer. When Justin arrived home that evening, he found divorce papers waiting for him on the porch, and in a small, nondescript apartment, Alfred Frell, now Nick Buford, watched it all unfold on his bank of monitors. A tumbler of whiskey in hand, he observed the chaos he had orchestrated with a mixture of grim satisfaction and a deep, aching sadness that he raised his glass to the screen. Cheers, Hope, he murmured. I hope it was worth it. Hope Frell stood in the checkout line at the local grocery store, her cart filled with the bare necessities. Her hand shook slightly as she reached for her wallet, knowing what was coming but praying for a miracle nonetheless. I'm sorry, ma'am, the cashier said, a hint of pity in her eyes. Your card's been declined. Hope felt the stares of the people in line behind her, heard their impatient sighs. Her cheeks burned with humiliation as she fumbled for another card. Then another. Each one useless, cancelled by Alfred and his meticulous destruction of their shared life. I'll have to come back, she mumbled, abandoning her cart and fleeing the store. In her car, Hope let out a strangled sob. How had it come to this? Just weeks ago, she had it all, a loving husband, a good job, financial security. Now, it was all gone, evaporated like morning dew under the harsh light of her betrayal. Her phone buzzed. Justin, Hope considered ignoring it, but desperation won out. They needed to find Alfred, to try and salvage something from this wreckage. Any luck? She asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Justin's bitter laugh crackled through the speaker. Oh yeah. Tons of luck. All bad. The PI we hired can't find a trace of Alfred. It's like he's vanished into thin air. Hope's grip tightened on the steering wheel. We have to keep looking. He's got all our money, Justin. I can't even buy groceries. You think I'm doing any better? Justin snapped. The station fired me. My wife's divorcing me. I'm sleeping on my buddy's couch. This is all your fault, you know. My fault? Hope's voice rose incredulously. It takes two to have an affair, Justin. You were just as involved as I was. Yeah, well, it wasn't my husband who went psycho and destroyed our lives, was it? The call ended abruptly, leaving Hope alone with her thoughts. She drove aimlessly, her mind racing. There had to be a way out of this nightmare. There had to be. Her phone rang again. Hope's heart leapt, hoping it was Justin calling back to apologize. Instead, she saw her mother's number on the screen. Mom. She answered hesitantly. Hope Elizabeth Frell, her mother's voice was ice-cold. Would you care to explain why I just received an anonymous email detailing your indiscretions? Hope's blood ran cold. Mom, I can explain, save it, her mother cut her off. Your father and I are beyond disappointed. We raised you better than this. Until you come to your senses and beg Alfred's forgiveness, don't bother calling us. The line went dead. Hope pulled over to the side of the road, her vision blurring with tears. She was alone. Truly, utterly alone. Meanwhile, in his rented apartment, Alfred, or rather, Nick Buford, leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. He had just hit send on the email to Hope's parents, another nail in the coffin of her former life. He turned his attention back to the monitors, watching Hope break down in her car through the traffic cam he had hacked. Part of him wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but that part was quickly silenced by the memory of her betrayal. You made your bed, Hope, he murmured. Now lie in it. As the weeks turned into months, Hope and Justin's desperate search for Alfred continued to yield nothing. Their relationship, once passionate and exciting, deteriorated into a series of bitter arguments and recriminations. This is useless. Justin shouted during one particularly heated exchange. We're never going to find him. And even if we did, what then? You think he's just going to hand over the money and forgive us? Hope sank onto the worn couch in Justin's friend's apartment, where they had both been staying. We have to keep trying, she said, her voice hollow. What else can we do? Justin ran a hand through his unkempt hair, his once handsome face haggard with stress. I don't know, Hope. I just don't know anymore. As they sat in defeated silence, neither of them was aware of the hidden camera capturing their every move, transmitting it all back to the man they were so desperately seeking. 6 months after Alfred Frell's disappearance, a new novel hit the shelves. The Postman Always Knows Twice by M.B. Fowler became an overnight sensation. Critics hailed it as a gripping tale of betrayal and revenge. Readers couldn't put it down. Talk shows clamored to interview the mysterious author. Hope Frell stood in the local bookstore, staring at the display of novels with a mixture of disbelief and horror. The cover showed a stylized image of a man in a postal uniform, his back turned, walking away from a woman reaching out to him. It was too close to home. Too familiar. With shaking hands, she picked up a copy and began to read. Page after page, her own story unfolded before her eyes. The names were changed, certain details altered, but there was no mistaking it. This was her life. Her affair. Her downfall. Laid bare for the world to see. It can't be, she whispered, drawing curious glances from other shoppers. It can't be him. But deep down, she knew. Alfred, quiet, unassuming Alfred, had outplayed them all. Across town, Justin Hendrick was having a similar revelation. He had been channel surfing in his dingy studio apartment when he saw a familiar face on the screen. It was Alfred, looking more confident and put together than Justin had ever seen him. So, Mr. Fowler, the talk show host was saying, your novel has struck a chord with readers everywhere. What inspired you to write it? Alfred, or rather, M.B. Fowler, smiled enigmatically. Well, Barbara, I think we've all experienced betrayal in some form or another. I wanted to explore what happens when someone decides not to just lie down and take it, but to fight back. Justin fumbled for his phone, dialing Hope's number with trembling fingers. "Are you seeing this?" he hissed when she answered. "It's Alfred. He's written a book about us." "I know," Hope replied, her voice hollow. "I'm holding a copy right now." As Alfred's book tour continued, his star only rose higher. He appeared on more talk shows, gave interviews to major newspapers, even hinted at a possible movie deal. With each appearance, he gained more sympathy as the wronged spouse who had turned his pain into art. Meanwhile, Hope and Justin watched their lives crumble further. They consulted lawyers about suing for defamation, but without hard evidence that the novel was about them, and with Alfred's meticulous changes to protect himself legally, they were advised it would be a losing battle. "He's ruined us," Hope said dully, staring at the cease and desist letter their lawyer had received in response to their inquiries. "Completely and utterly ruined us." Justin, who had been pacing the small office, suddenly whirled on her. "No, Hope. You ruined us. You and your inability to keep your damn mouth shut about our affair. If you hadn't bragged to your friends, if you hadn't been so careless, none of this would have happened." As they descended into yet another argument, neither noticed the small camera hidden in the potted plant in the corner of the lawyer's office, transmitting their distress to a man miles away. Alfred, now comfortably settled in a luxurious apartment paid for by his book's success, watched the feed with a mix of satisfaction and unexpected melancholy. He had won that he had his revenge. So why didn't he feel as triumphant as he'd expected? Shaking off the moment of doubt, Alfred turned his attention to his laptop. He had charitable donations to make. Anonymously, of course, let the town see how their once beloved radio personality and his mistress had fallen, while a mysterious benefactor supported local causes. It was the perfect final touch, the ultimate victory. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered her verdict. Hope sat rigid in her chair, her once stylish clothes now worn and shabby. Across the aisle, Alfred, looking every inch the successful author in a tailored suit, listened impassively. "In the matter of Frel versus Frel," the judge began, "this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Alfred Frel. Given the evidence presented of Mrs. Frel's infidelity and Mr. Frel's significant contributions to the marriage, the division of assets will be as follows." Hope barely heard the rest. It was over. Alfred had won, again. The careful documentation of her affair. The financial records showing how he had supported her through graduate school. The character witnesses attesting to his upstanding nature. Her recent erratic behavior. It had all led to this moment that as the court adjourned, Hope watched Alfred stride confidently out of the room. He didn't even glance in her direction. She was nothing to him now. Less than nothing. Weeks later, Hope sat at her small kitchen table, pen hovering over a blank sheet of paper. She had lost everything, her job, her reputation, her family's support. Alfred's book was still topping the bestseller list, a constant reminder of her shame. In desperation, she decided to make one last appeal. "Dear Alfred, I know I have no right to contact you. No right to ask for anything. But I'm begging you, please, can we talk? I know what I did was unforgivable, but I never meant to hurt you. I never stopped loving you. Please, Alfred. I have nothing left. No one left. You're my only hope." She sealed the letter with tears in her eyes, clinging to a shred of hope that somewhere, deep down, Alfred still cared. 3 days later, a large manila envelope arrived at Hope's apartment. Her heart leapt. Had Alfred read her letter? Was this a response? But as she tore it open, her hope turned to ashes. Inside was a formal cease and desist order, threatening legal action if she attempted to contact Alfred again. It was signed by his lawyer, not even by Alfred himself. Hope sank to the floor, the papers scattered around her. It was truly, finally over. Across town, Justin Hendrick packed the last of his meager belongings into a battered suitcase. The town that had once adored him now shunned him at every turn. No one would hire him. Not even for the most menial jobs. Every stranger's glance felt accusing. Every whispered conversation seemed to be about him. He couldn't take it anymore, with no destination in mind. Justin tossed his suitcase into his car, the one possession he'd managed to keep, and drove away from the town that had been his home for so long that he didn't look back. Meanwhile, Alfred Frell stood in the local animal shelter, surrounded by the barks and meows of abandoned pets that he had started volunteering here a few weeks ago, finding unexpected solace in caring for these forgotten creatures. As he walked down the row of kennels, a pair of soulful brown eyes caught his attention. A mixed-breed dog, probably part lab, part who knows what, watched him cautiously. The sign on the kennel read, "Max 3 years old. Abandoned." Something in the dog's weary gaze struck a chord in Alfred. Here was another being who had been betrayed. Left behind by those who should have cared for him. Alfred crouched down. "Hey there, Max," he said softly. "How about we start over, together?" Max's tail gave a tentative wag. And as Alfred filled out the adoption papers, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could learn to trust again. To love again. It wouldn't be easy. The pain of hope's betrayal still lingered, a dull ache in his chest. But as he clipped a leash onto Max's collar and led him out of the shelter, Alfred felt the first stirrings of a new chapter beginning. "Come on, boy," he said, scratching Max behind the ears. "Let's go home." As they walked out into the sunlight, Alfred Frell, author, divorce, and now dog owner, took his first step toward a future unburdened by the weight of betrayal and revenge. Max trotted alongside him, his paws patting softly on the sidewalk. For a moment, Alfred allowed himself to imagine a life filled with simple pleasures, long walks in the park, quiet evenings by the fireplace, the unconditional love of a loyal companion. But as they reached Alfred's car, a flicker of movement across the street caught his eye. There, half hidden behind a parked van, stood Hope. Her once perfect hair was limp and unkempt, her designer clothes replaced by a shabby sweater and jeans. Their eyes met for a brief, electric moment. Alfred felt a surge of conflicting emotions, anger, pity, a ghost of the love he had once felt. For a heartbeat, he considered crossing the street. Speaking to her. Offering forgiveness. A second chance. Max whined softly, drawing Alfred's attention back to the present. He looked down at the dog, then back up at Hope. She took a hesitant step forward, hope blooming in her eyes. Alfred shook his head once, firmly, then, he opened the car door, helped Max inside, and drove away, without looking back. As the shelter receded in his rearview mirror, Alfred felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The chapter of his life that included Hope was over. He had exacted his revenge. He had written his story, and now, it was time to move on. He glanced at Max, who was watching the world go by with eager curiosity. "Well, boy," Alfred said, reaching over to scratch behind the dog's ears, "looks like it's just you and me now. Ready for a new adventure?" Max's tail thumped against the seat in response. As they drove home, Alfred's mind wandered to his next book project, perhaps a lighter tale this time, something about new beginnings. About second chances. He had a feeling he'd have plenty of inspiration. The sun was setting as Alfred pulled into his driveway, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn of his new home, a modest but comfortable house, bought with the proceeds from his bestseller. As he and Max walked up the path, Alfred felt a sense of peace settle over him. Inside, he unclipped Max's leash and watched as the dog cautiously explored his new surroundings. Alfred moved through the house, turning on lights and shedding the persona of M.B. Fowler, successful author, like an old coat. In his study, he paused before the wall of framed clippings, reviews of his book, photos from his talk show appearances, the New York Times bestseller list with his name at the top, mementos of his triumph, his revenge. For a moment, he considered taking them down. But no, they were part of his story now. A reminder of how far he had come. Of what he had overcome. Max padded into the room, pressing against Alfred's leg. Alfred looked down at the dog, then back at the wall of memories. "You know what, Max?" he said softly. "I think we both deserve a fresh start. He reached out and straightened one of the frames, a small smile playing on his lips. The past couldn't be erased, but it didn't have to define his future. As the night deepened, Alfred settled into his favorite armchair, a notebook open on his lap, Max curled up at his feet, a warm, comforting presence. The house was quiet. Safe, with the scratch of pen on paper and the occasional contented sigh from the dog, Alfred wrote late into the night. But this time, instead of a tale of betrayal and revenge, he found himself writing about redemption, about the healing power of unexpected connection. As he finally set down his pen and prepared for bed, Alfred realized something. He felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, excitement for the future. He had survived the storm of betrayal. He had navigated the turbulent waters of revenge, and now, he found himself on the shores of a new beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, but for now, as he drifted off to sleep with Max snoring softly beside the bed, Alfred Frell was content. The story of the betrayed postal worker was over. The story of Alfred Frell, author and dog owner, was just beginning.